Hi there, I'm Carl, and today on Carl Makes Things, I'm going to be taking you guys through my process that I use to paint up this Clone Trooper commander from the, I believe it's the Phase 1 Clone Trooper box set from the Star Wars Legion game. So to start off with, let's talk about the primer that I use, which is gray. The reason I prime gray when I'm painting white is that there's a lot of areas that, if you primed white, tend to look artificially bright once the miniature is finished. Places like underneath his helmet, for example. If I take up my other miniature here and we look underneath his helmet, we can see that he's nice in a kind of dark shadowed area underneath there. And that's because when I was building up the color for this guy, I didn't ever actually apply any white paint to that area. It's just gray. And that allows us to have kind of more natural deep shadows in those recesses and not actually have to go in there and touch those up. Because the alternative to that, the solution to that, if we actually did prime white, would be to go in there and actually paint in the darker area, which is kind of a pain, because at that point we might accidentally mess up our nice white coat. Also, adding shadows into a lot of like subtle areas, like underneath his like shoulder pads and in between his legs and stuff, those areas get to be kind of a chore. So we're going to be taking the shortcut here and using one of my favorite techniques, which is using makeup sponges to kind of come in with our paint and kind of just apply paint to the raised areas. So to get started, we actually need to mix up some paint and get our sponge loaded up, because the first step on this project is to actually throw the white on here. All right, so the first color I'm going to start off with today is some Ghost Gray, and we're going to be using this as the example for our sponge technique. I'm going to take it and put just a drop of this on our wet palette. I need a pretty healthy drop because we're going to need quite a bit of this. Take a little bit of water from my little water reserve cup that I've got kicking around, and I'm going to make a 1-to-1 ratio here for this first kind of initial layer. There we go. And then using the back of my brush, I'm just going to mix these two together. So the reason that I'm doing this, mixing the water in like so, is that it creates a smoother finish. So now that my paint is mixed up, I need to prepare my makeup sponge. And I'm just going to take a makeup sponge here, and just to get a nice flat surface on this, I'm going to cut it about halfway through. And I'm going to be using this surface here for the majority of my work today. So to load this sponge up, I'm just going to come in and kind of soak in some of this paint and just move it around my palette a bit. And you can see that I'm using these nice tweezers here. This is just so my hand doesn't get tired. And it's also so that you can see the miniature a bit better while I'm painting. So I'm going to move my palette off to the side, and we're going to get started. So this technique is quite simple. Really all there is to it is loading your sponge up with a appropriately thinned paint, and then kind of just dabbing it onto the miniature in light repetitive strokes. Sometimes you might find that a little texture is built up in some areas and you want to smooth that out. We can just take the side of the sponge that doesn't have any paint on it and kind of not just exactly wipe up, but kind of mitigate that kind of texture by smoothing it out with the side of the sponge. And really all we're looking for here is just to put a nice coat down, make sure it's nice and even, and get it on all the sides that we want. Alright, so that's our first coat of Ghost Gray down, and it's not perfectly even, and it's not, covering as well as I'd like in some areas. There's some areas I want it to be a little bit softer. So I'm going to come in with a little bit more of my Ghost Gray, and I'm just going to go and do a second coat real quick. Alright, so that's our first 2 coats of Ghost Gray, and it's looking pretty good. I'm going to step up to pure white now and start working on some intensity here. And it's going to be the same process. I'm just going to mix it up the same way that I mixed up the Ghost Gray on the palette. And that is our first coat of white down. I'm just going to go and quickly put another coat of white on this guy just because I have it on the sponge already. And I'm just going to do this just to brighten up and make sure my white is nice and solid. But this time I'm going over it just very lightly. I'm more skimming over this guy, just trying to get the most highest raised areas just to brighten those areas up. And that white coat is fully dry and complete. The next step is going to be washing this miniature, and the technique we're going to be using something called a pin wash. So I'm going to grab some Army Painter Dark Shade, some matte medium, and some water and mix them together in basically a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio. This is going to create a thinner, more controllable wash that's going to take a little bit longer to dry than if we used it right out of the pot. And the advantage to that is that if we make any mistakes, we can take a little bit of water, which is what I'm putting in the dish here, and kind of just wick those mistakes away and just kind of wipe them away before the wash actually has a chance to dry. So I have loaded a very delicate amount of this wash onto this kind of large broad tip brush, and I'm just using capillary action, essentially the kind of surface tension of the wash, and just lightly touching to the surface of the areas that I want to be darker or more shaded on the miniature, and just letting that wash kind of naturally flow into those areas. If I deposit too much, like I do kind of on that backpack, I can come in there with the clean brush and use the kind of reverse capillary action of like a clean moist brush to suck that wash back up off the miniature, and then kind of come in and clean it up a little bit. Any mistakes that you do make can be easily repaired at this stage. Just before you kind of proceed to the next steps, just make sure to go over the miniature, and if you see any wash where it's kind of pooled in places you don't like, take a little bit of your white paint you still probably have on your palette and just touch those areas up. So the next stage here is going to be taking some black paint. I'm using Vallejo model colored black in particular, and I've thinned it down to basically a 1-to-1 ratio like most of the other paint I've been using, and I'm just going to apply it with a big broad brush to the weapon, and then I'm going to come back in with a smaller brush and basically go into all the little joints on this guy and just paint in the black on his bodysuit using a very fine tipped brush. So to finish up our black coat here, I'm going to take some dark tone, pure dark tone, it's not thinned with anything, and I'm going to touch it into the visor and a few of the elements on the helmet that need to be purely black. The reason being that it's kind of difficult to get a brush in there, and if you do make a mistake, the dark tone, as seen here, is a lot thinner than pure black paint, and it's easier to tidy up with the white paint that we have kind of kicking around. So our next step here is going to be adding a little bit more definition and like highlighting to this weapon. We're going to do that by sponging on just a little bit of our white paint and then coming back over it with some dark tone to kind of tie that highlight together with the overall kind of darker tone of the blaster. So for the commander's binoculars, I started off by painting the eye cups black, and then I kind of did a tone pass on them because I really didn't do too much work on them earlier. And the tone mix that I used was the thinner mix that we used for the overall armor details. And for the strap here, I grabbed some Cork brown, just thinned it out until it flowed nicely. And I'm going to come in here with my nice detail brush and just delicately put it on this strap here. As I was working on the strap, I noticed that the top area that was kind of in contact with his shoulder looked like a different material, almost like it was padded. So I came in with some black paint and just delicately filled that area in. So at this point, we should have filled in all of the details on our miniature, and the last step really is to do the base. Bases are going to be unique for everybody. I chose to do kind of this sandy earth texture base, almost like it's a Geonosis style base, and I just got some rocks super glued on there and some Vallejo earth texture applied down, and what I'm doing now is just coming in with some Cork brown and just giving it a good old healthy coat all over. So I got some Stonewall gray for this next step, and what I'm going to do is just give all of these rocks a kind of base coat with it. This is going to more or less kind of reset the colors that have been introduced through the sponge blending technique on these rocks and give me a little bit more finer control later when I start doing a little bit more detail work on them. So to add more definition to the rocks, I've decided to give them a good old wash of dark tone, and I'm also going to come and take this tone and apply it around him in kind of a contact shadow to ground him a little bit more into his base and make him feel like he's affecting the environment a bit more. So to push even more variation into this base, I'm going to grab some soft tone, put a drop down, and essentially just apply it everywhere that I didn't apply any dark tone on the base. This is going to warm up the kind of color and just make it feel a little less uniform, just break up that kind of uniform Cork brown layer we put down. And as a last little step with this soft tone, I'm going to apply a little bit of it to the strap. This is going to darken up the center of the strap and make it feel like it has a bit of an edge highlight and kind of give it a little bit more depth. So what I'm doing here is I'm applying a little bit of Cork brown to my kind of, desk palette that I've got going on, and just getting most of the paint off of this, because what we're going to be doing here is dry brushing kind of some dirt onto this guy's legs. And this is going to tie him together with his base and make him feel like he's actually moved through the environment. And when you're dry brushing, the secret there is use a dry paint, use a dry brush, and go over with many, many repetitive strokes. It takes a little while, but the end effect is going to look quite good. It's going to look like he's actually been walking around in the desert. I'm going to grab some of my model color white here and also do a little bit of a dry brush on these rocks, but I'm going to continue this dry brushing of his greaves with this model color white with the idea of feathering that kind of harder edge that I've introduced with that more impactful cork brown and just making it feel a little bit more natural, a little bit softer. So the last step here is to just tidy up this guy's base with a little bit of our black paint. So here is the final product turnaround for this Clone Trooper Commander, and I think he's looking pretty dang good. One thing to note is that he took me about 45 minutes to paint up, but we can speed that process up dramatically and achieve the same quality by batch painting. So if you're following along with this tutorial, you might want to paint one guy up just to try it out, and then go back over like I'm doing here and paint everybody up kind of in one go. And this kind of production style painting, production line style painting is super fast and efficient because you're only mixing paints up once and you're kind of doing the same process to everybody concurrently, so you're making sure everyone's even and looks the same. To emphasize the speed savings, like the Commander took me about 45 minutes, the entire squad, the other 6 guys, took me about an hour and a half. And I'm afraid that's all I have for you for today. If you want to see more, you can check out some of my other videos. If you want to help the channel out, you can like, comment, and subscribe, you know, the standard YouTube stuff. You can also join the KMT Discord. It is free and it's up to everyone. Everyone's welcome. And you can get some pretty cool stuff if you join the KMT Patreon, so maybe you want to check that out as well. And lastly, I want to thank all of my patrons who do support the videos. You guys are fantastic, and I'm super thankful for you and your support. Have a good one. Carl out.